different business model behind. And this means that the different ecosystem became more and more complex and dynamic to observe and to analyze. Then a second consideration, which is mainly the more interesting motivation, is that it's more and more critical for companies to identify who controls the value. So which is the control point? Where are the control points inside this ecosystem? How these control points change? Because if I control the customer, maybe if I own the data about the customer, maybe I have a bigger power inside the ecosystem. I can define the rules of the game. Or otherwise, if I control only the content, maybe I have less power, less influence. But maybe the literature is not clear which is the meaning of control point and what does it mean to create value or to capture value inside the ecosystem. Or better, how these control points change according to the dynamic of the system. If these are the motivation of the study, the argument I stressed, and the first results are published in this article. There was a second study which is now in progress that tried to go behind these results and to analyze more, is try to support the double helix model developed by Fine. I had the chance to work with him at MIT, and he developed this interesting model that mapped the evolution of any industry with the double helix. But I try to apply this double helix in the logic of a digital system and to see what happens if it is still valid when there is an incremental innovation and a disruptive innovation. I briefly present now the conceptual framework, the opinion, the methodology adopted, and the implication, the results and the implication of this research, which open up the next steps. Conceptual framework. First of all, any digital business strategy calls for the coordination across the product, because I have a specific product, so I need different competencies that need to be brought down to create a specific product. Whichever it is, we can consider the television, the video. I need different competencies: content provider, application service provider, who provides the network. But in the same time, I need also new competencies in terms of process and also in the service domain. Think about also the augmented reality could bring additional value to an existing product broadcast or diffused through a different specific technology or a specific platform. And the products and service increasingly have digital technologies inside. This is true in the retail, this is true in different industry, because the different product and service becomes more and more digitalized. But what does it mean this? That maybe information technology play a role, whichever is the industry I'm considering, and particularly there is a convergence or different competencies work together in the product, process and service I'm trying to distribute and to offer. Now, if this is the system and this is the conceptual framework, we can say that inside this ecosystem there are some control points. Or better, an ecosystem can be, or value network that becomes an ecosystem, can be described as a configuration of control points. That means that each control point is a point that produces value in different way or capture value from the customer in a different way. So a control point means different players that contribute to the total value that the consumer receives at the end, and they capture in different way the value which is produced by this value network. So the value network perspective imply to adapt and to analyze the evolution of the different nodes that compose the value creation. What is critical is that how we can identify who create, who capture, and how these counterpoints change with the dynamic of the ecosystem. This has many managerial implications, because if I understand that controlling the data, controlling and cloud computing has this role, controlling data is more and more critical, because it makes me more powerful in terms of collecting information and selling this data about the customer. Maybe it's better moving there and try to control this phase. In some sense, it's what Google is doing, trying to become more and more oriented to managing data, and so managing the cloud. The opinion is applying the double helix model presented by Fine in the digital ecosystem, with the evolution of the digital ecosystem. We can say that there are two different phases. In the first phase is I start with a value chain or a value network, and in particular, we can see that the organizational structure of the system is based on vertical integration and also centralized proprietary system. Then at a certain point, the competition starts. The operator cannot control, cannot be the giant, the monopolistic situation. So the competition starts, and there is an incremental innovation. In order to compete, I try to put an advantage, competitive advantage. The technology is the same, the innovation is the same, but there is a tendency to create an incremental innovation. What happens in the system is that I move from an integral, vertical, concentrated system towards a more value network, more modular disintegration, and more modular value network, in which each company tends not to control all the value creation process, but try to focus on a specific competence and try to collaborate with other players to provide the whole network, the whole value to the customer. But of course, the second part of the double helix model says that at a certain point, there is a disruptive innovation. The technology becomes mature. We are moving on the upper side of the S-curve, so the market is more mature. In order to survive, I needed to have a disruptive innovation to move it on another S-curve. And what happens is there are cross-boundary industry disruption, and there is a tendency, an incentive to integrate and to lock in the advantage. So the system comes back to the initial phase. In order to demonstrate this tendency, this evolution of the system or the ecosystem, and so how the control points changed, I formulated some opinion, and the opinion are, okay, in the first phase, I have a concentrated vertical integration, then an incremental innovation come up that disrupted the network and became more modularized, different moduli control specific competencies, and at a certain point, there is a disruptive innovation, and the network becomes, again, vertically integrated, so there is a tendency to come back. In order to support this, the empirical study was focused on the evolution of digital television. Of course, at the beginning, we can say that there are different industries, and we can focus on the digital television. But now, in 2014, maybe it's not a well-defined industry of digital television. There is a convergence with different platforms, with other services, with other technologies. What happened in the digital television? At the beginning, there was an S-curve, and so different incremental innovation. We're moving from analog television towards digital television, so it can be seen as an incremental innovation. But at a certain point, there is a disruption. We are moving on a different S-curve, and the system change. We can talk about a multi-sided platform or a cross-boundary industry disruption, different way to distribute the content, different business model behind. Think about Netflix, think about the social TV, Hulu. I'm not talking about a company, a traditional television company, but moving towards a multi-sided platform. I can talk about a platform that offers a different service. It's a totally disrupted market. And in order to analyze how the ecosystem changed with the appearance of this incremental innovation and disruptive innovation, we conducted 45 semi-structured interviews in Europe and US, followed by a longitudinal analysis lasted 8 years on the main players in the digital television system. Being players means we analyzed the different phases of the value chain, considering content provider, semiconductor, electronic supplier, broadcaster, software, till the end consumer provided. So we mapped how the core competencies and the edge competencies changed during the time. And we checked also internal and external validity and reliability, collecting information from the press and from the different sources. What happened? What we focused, the specific unit of analysis, was to focus on the core and edge capabilities. So in this big data set, monitor year by year, and this was thanks to the opportunity to work at Bocconi University in Milano, where we mapped all these core and edge capabilities in the digital system. This means create a big data set that analyzes for each company which is the core capability, which is the edge capability, and then monitor the same for the next year and the following year. And there was a huge database for Europe. Then I spent a sabbatical leave at MIT, and we crossed also the data set with other studies conducted there on the US. And so there was a possibility to enlarge this data set to confirm more this hypothesis. So we focused on core and edge capabilities for each player in this industry, which was becoming which is growing a lot. So phase 1 was empirical results, phase 2 the selection of the model structure, and the first 3 is the model estimation and validation. Analyzing all this data during these 8 years, it appeared 3 main topology of control point constellation, and we call them close vertically integrated model, loosely coupled coalition model, and multi-sided platform. And now I explain this 3 constellation model. So the first is the closed vertical integrated model. At the beginning, when we observe the digital television system, we have different players, we have the different phase of the value chain, and we have the different players. And there is a tendency to have big giants that control all the main phases of the value chain. And this map represents the tendency. So I have, in red, I have the core competencies, and in blue, the edge competencies. You can see that broadcasters tend to control, to develop core competencies in the main phase of the value chain. That means an integrated structure. The control point, in this case, who control the value and who capture the value is the same player, because it tends to control all the phases in the industry. But what happens with the evolution of the system? So we have a value creation logic, value capture logic. Value is captured by the giant because it controls the production of the value. I have primary activity, and so on. This is the unit of analysis for each phase, each industry system. At a certain point, we said before, in order to compete, so the giant, the market becomes more competitive, also in the broadcast television. And so in order to compete, I have to create a competitive advantage, so to focus on an incremental innovation. And in this case, the incremental innovation was the emergence of the digital television, the digital technology that doesn't change anything in terms of activity of value network of the traditional broadcaster, but increase the competition because the number of channels increase, there is more competition. What you can see here in this second map referred to the US case, then I show the European case, is that there are a fragmentation of players, different players enter because they can contribute to the total value, also producing content, and you have a new market because the digital technology multiply the channel. And what we analyze is that the market becomes more and more complex with different players entering, and the different players focus their core competence on specific phase of the value chain that don't tend to control all the value proposition. This is the case of US, and this is the case specifically for Italy, to map it for each country in Europe, but you can see the same logic. The different colors correspond to the different players in the value chain, but we have a fragmentation and modularization because each player tends to control a specific component of the value creation. What does it mean? You can see here that the situation is completely different compared to the previous one, because we tend to have a value network now. It's not a value chain. We have a real value network where the different players tend to focus on a specific phase of the value chain in order to compete and to be more flexible and to gain advantage. But this means that I'm not a giant. I don't control of the core competence, And maybe who control the value creation is different compared to who control the value capture. We can see that the value creation is different, who create the value in a different phase of the value chain, and change in terms of players, and each player can focus on a specific phase of the value chain. And who capture the value is, again, maybe who controls the user at the end. The service provider has the more power. It is debated, what does it mean to capture value? What is value? And we can say that before cloud, maybe the value is the revenue. Who controls the revenue? The profit that the customer pay. There is a big debate about what is value. Maybe moving with the cloud computing, the value is something different. I'm more interested in controlling data. Who controls the data maybe has the stronger power in the system. So maybe you can say that cloud computing is a next step that changes, also disrupt the real business model in terms of value, real meaning of value. And here we have the different, the different counterpoint. Again, we can compare value creation logic and value capture logic. As said, the value creation logic, I focus on a specific phase of the value chain, and value capture logic, who controls the value is who control the revenue on the back, because I deal with the customer, or it can control also the content. And there is a big debate if it is better to be a content gatekeeper or a customer gatekeeper, because also if I control the content, I'm providing value that capture users. So I think there is a bipolarization of the value creation in this case, but the nodes are well identified and are related to the capacity to generate revenues. Now let's see the third step, which is more related to the evolution, and so the evolution of the cloud computing, maybe, even if I'm not focused on cloud in this paper. What happens is that at a certain point, this digital disruption, disruptive innovation comes up. When disruptive innovation, I don't mean necessarily the technology that changes the business model, the architecture of the business model behind. Because the different content provider became, or better, the traditional television became a platform aggregator, or we assist to the emergence of new players that take the role of platform aggregator. I can think about Hulu or many other platform aggregators. Also Netflix is one of them. And this platform aggregator work with network and work with different sides. And one of these sides is also end user, because the co-creation process, social network comes up, and I have different platforms, and the capacity change because the business change. I have to manage different sides provide value in different way, and one side is represented by end user that create the value in some sense, and it becomes more and more important to be at the center. So who creates the value and who capture value more, the control point, are concentrated in the aggregator platform more and more. And this aggregator platform control the core competence of all the system, while the other sides are focused on the edge component. They cannot work alone. They need the aggregator platform inside. So the value creation logic change because bringing together two more groups of customer or players, building the infrastructure, give power to these aggregator platforms. The value capture logic again is the platform, of course, collect data about the customer, and the platform also collect revenues that share with the different players. We can think about the role of Google. Google became an aggregator platform more and more and offer different service for free to capture new sites and to enlarge the market in terms of end user. And the capability in this case is to control data and to control data about the customer, because this becomes the main business. So we can see another step maybe in the future, which is a new form of aggregator platform, a platform that is a cross-boundary, but this could be the next step. So what, looking at data on the table and collected through just longitudinal analysis in this 8 years, we can prove that there are this evolution in the ecosystem and in the control points. We called this closed vertical integrated at the beginning because there is a giant that controls the different phase of the value production. Then I have a loosely coupled coalition, but then in order to compete, and this is the rule of the market behind, because incremental innovation is generated by competition, but at a certain point I wanted to disrupt to become again the leader, and this disruption led to the incentive to integrate lock-in, and so we are moving towards this multi-sided platform. Now the question is, which is the next step? And maybe the next step could be the emergence of a giant component. This is the ambition to look at. So implication for research and practice in 1 minute. So it's important in each ecosystem to identify clearly who controls the value, who captures the value. And in some cases, okay, it's more and more critical to do this, but I would like to think about implication in terms of future evolution. Again, it's important to control what is value. I think it's the real changing element, and maybe value is more and more data and the capability to control the cloud, not to just to generate revenues. And of course, we support the double helix model. In order to survive in complex environment, we need to develop an organizational intelligence and also relational intelligence, because it's more and more critical to aggregate the different sides that are critical, that produce the real value that could be considered interesting for the user. And of course, this structure is dynamic and needs to be changed. And maybe for the next step, in that paper, there was as a forecast to see that maybe there could be a situation in which there will be a giant that appears in the market and will become the monopolistic, such as Google, that control all the data, that control all the main content provided, and try to compete launching something new. By the way, this is the presentation, so thank you for...
Yeah. I was wondering, regarding your last remark, how your model can help understand the future of Google, Facebook, and
yeah. I think that, okay, the tendency now is a multi-sided platform. What changes, because the multi-sided platform, what changes is the business model behind. Because the business model we see for Google, for example, is to offer, and also because the company said that this is their strategy, is to enlarge the service and the content they offer. This means they have partnership. They enlarge the sites that produce content, and they control these sites. But the real strategy is to aggregate more and more users to this platform. Why? Because they can then collect data, check, track, and their business is to sell this data to the business. So the winning giant, it could be Facebook, it could be Google, but the tendency is just to control and multiply the size of the market and try to be present there, because at the end, Google is not simply a partnership. I provide Google Maps, so I control this. I have a Google Plus, so I own my own social network. Maybe it's critical for the giant to identify which are the sites which are more critical and try to control, in some sense, the sites. One of them could be the social network sites, because allows to be in touch with the user and to collect data directly from the user. So maybe in the evolution, just to answer your question, is identify, maybe in the same logic, which are the core sides and the edge sides, and try to be present there. And maybe if this double helix is still valid for the next step, this means that there will be other fragmentation, maybe, and the evolution change in a different way. What we say today that we are again in this second loop. We arrived to create a giant, as happened at the beginning. I control all the core competency. I'm not so sure that this situation is static, and maybe the next step will be to have a fragmentation. What does it mean? It could be a new technology coming up, new devices, because the players tend to compete in some way to survive. Facebook had to compete with Google and to survive. Thank you. Oh. No. Thank you.
In looking at multi-sided platforms, can you distinguish different topologies of multi-sided platforms? And so, for example, when I think, let's say, of the auto industry and the connected car, and they're trying to create, a platform around that, I don't see the giant emerging because so are there distributed control points in different types of multi-sided platforms, or how do you view the distinctions among them?
That is an interesting insight question, difficult to answer. What you mentioned that the auto industry, and with the evolution of NFC technology for the mobile, the auto industry became digital. At the beginning, I said the product, process, and the service try to be large, and each product has a digital component part. The car are impacted by the evolution of NFC. With the smartphone, I can open my car, I have geolocalization, the NFC generated. No, I see that auto car can be impacted, can enter in the digital ecosystem through the NFC technology. Because if I have the telecommunication that controls data, because the data are transmitted through the smartphone, the car became just a content provider in some sense. It's the device, but the telecommunication company controller is still the giant because track data and sell this data concerning the movement for the smart city, the movement in the city, or the sell which car are bought by the customer. So different industry play a role inside the multi-sided platform. Maybe an interesting point is to classify the topology of different multi-sided. That could be very, very curious in the next step. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margherita. So then I move to